Here we are talking about managed identities for Azure resources. It's important to take a step back for a minute. And by that, here's what I mean. When you got into the cloud game, I don't really want to call it a game, it's actually very powerful. Part of the reason you got into the cloud and are working with the cloud and the cloud in general, Azure, is so successful is because we are able to let go of a lot of the responsibilities we had to deal with. For example, our infrastructure. We had to deal with data centers and managing our storage, our network, our servers, our power, our fan, our cooling, our disaster recovery, scalability, clustering, replication, availability. Remember all these pains, if you will? If something was to go wrong with one of your servers, you had to deal with that. You had no other choice in the matter. Your disaster recovery plan for a off-site, hot, warm, or cold site required tremendous amount of resources, financial, human, and just in effort and expertise. You not only had to worry about managing your infrastructure and creating your infrastructure, designing it, finding space for it, paying for it, yet to work with it. And if you ran out of space, and what I mean by either physical space or virtual space, you ran out of physical or virtual space, you had to actually scale up, didn't you? You had to scale. You had to scale up, which meant you needed to buy more hardware, or you needed to scale out, which meant you needed to buy more hardware. And that wasn't always possible. Even if you had the money to do so, adding more hardware to your existing servers or adding more servers took a whole lot of time. This is my horrible impression of creating a clock. So, what I mean to say is, part of the reason you're working with the cloud is because you want some other entity, Azure, to help you with some of that pain. Allow me to reiterate something for a minute. The cloud is not only responsible for helping you alleviate some of the physical pain or the limitations of physical resources, it is also responsible for helping you deal with virtual resources. Now, here I am looking at cloud service models, the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, isn't it? You've heard of all this before, isn't that true? The fact of the matter is, the closer you get to software, the closer you are to the user, and the closer you get to infrastructure, the closer you are to an IT admin. Okay? The platform as a service is really meant kind of for developers. This is really what we're dealing with, the operating system, the middleware, the runtime, and applications and such. Managed identities, if you will, is a identity as a service, is it not? Identity as a service, or X as a service, if you will. Identities is a virtual thing. Well, they can be physical, I suppose, but in this instance, we're talking about virtual things, these service principal-like things, the way they are on-prem. But here, managed identities are used for Azure resources so that we can communicate and work with and deal with identities in Azure. So really it comes down to, what can I use managed identities for anyway, as I am in Azure? How does this managed identities help me ease some of the headaches I deal with as a developer? As I was saying, managed identities, if you will, can be considered platform as a service. More specifically, identity as a service, not to be confused with our infrastructure ID as a service. Right? So anytime you're thinking about as a service anything, this is another way of saying that you're letting the cloud resource deal with some of the management associated with whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. In this case, it happens to be identities. Now, this is no small feat. This is a very big deal. If you need to gain access to Azure resources Whether they are VMs or application services or functions or containers, the target that you're trying to gain access to is the Key Vault or storage or Azure SQL or Cosmos DB or a Azure machine learning service. Whatever your source is to the target, you can work with managed identities without having to manage any credentials. It is the ultimate in authorization. It deals with all the keys, privacy, protection. It deals with the life cycle of your managed identity, so you don't have to worry about it. So if you have a managed identity associated with the VM that is accessing Azure SQL, and you trash that VM, the identity is gone. You don't have to worry about its life cycle the way you had to in the past. Or maybe you still do, because you're not utilizing managed identities. So what is the lay of the land, as the saying goes? So here's Azure AD. It gives you the ability to have a user principal and a service principal. And underneath the service principal, you have app registration, which is perhaps custom to the enterprise. And then you have managed identities. That's correct. Managed identities are a type of service principal. And managed identities, are broken out into user-managed identity and system-assigned managed identity. This is completely self-serving, if you will. You don't have to worry about it at all. So managed identity is a type of a service principal managed by Azure. So that's managed identities.